Welcome back to 8 Cubes. I'm KMBest. He's Lambie Series. This is Lambie's episode. For the first time in 3 weeks, we are back on Lambie Series' channel with the biggest, the best, the greatest OTA they've ever done. It's literally like they invented this out of my mind. Like it sprung out of my mind like Aphrodite, Athena out of the head of Zeus. Like I absolutely love what they did in the OTA. And we're going to start with Professor X, who is now a 5/2. This card allows things to move and switch instead of fully locking down the location. So it'll still stop Hela stuff from spawning. It'll still stop Doctor Doom stuff from spawning. But you can move stuff into it. And Annihilus stuff will now happen under Professor X. So meaningful gap. Of course, the most important thing, Cannonball will now just send whatever to the Professor X lane. And that combo is finally dealt with.
Yeah, so Professor X, to me personally, with my limited testing so far as of recording this video, I feel like the card is way worse right now, right? Because like there are so many things that can access that Professor X location. Even not talking about it now, it doesn't work with Ravonna anymore. So no more turn for Professor X, which is was something really difficult to deal with. But no, on the cards that can actually get into the Professor X location now, like quite literally any move card like Nightcrawlers, Silks, and our favorite Nocturne now is premium when it comes to dealing with Professor X. So I feel like this card falls way down in terms of playability, and I think that's a very good thing, right? Like we will see a shift in the guard, like more decks that used to be really bad into old Professor X will be coming up and springing up into the top tiers of the meta. So I'm very curious to see where we land up with this. But for now, I would say thank you, Second Dinner, for pushing Prof X into, I wouldn't say oblivion, but into not mass playable territory, you know. And I'm glad we're going in this direction. And yeah, this is just like one thing that happened this OTA. There's a lot of things that happened that definitely will shake up this meta. And as of now, I do think that we are in a state of wide openness. Like I think we can do like many things that could work. You know, I'm very excited to see where this turns out.
I played 5 hours of Marvel Snap just before this podcast. I did not see a single Professor X. This is the
Nice.
best quality of life update we ever could have gotten. And it's not even like the card is unplayable now. It just requires new things to make it work. I saw W playing with Professor X and then using Magneto to pull stuff out of the Professor X lane, sort of like the old Magneto Storm combo. Like, it's a very interesting card now. It's not the end of the world. And, like, if you are able to be a deck that can still use Professor X, you just can't use Professor X with Cannonball anymore. You could still do Professor X in very large guys, right? Like, I actually think this card is likely to end up still being probably a core card in Thanos, right? Because Thanos is still interested in what it delivers, and Thanos has a million billion big dudes. And so I don't necessarily think it's like a dead card. I think it's just now no longer oppressive. And I think people need to get used to the fact that when there is a card that makes the game a one-track game and it is very good, they're going to get rid of it. They did this with Goliath, they did this with Galactus, they're doing it now with Prof X Cannonball. That stuff is not going to stick around. And so one thing that I'm taking away from this is, and I've been saying for a few weeks, like, I think they're probably going to nerf it, don't buy Cannonball, but please keep in mind, like, when something seems this strong and this linear, like there's no reads involved or anything, it's just Professor X Cannonball win game, I would always expect that to get dealt with. To me, that's just my read on the situation.
Yeah, I do think one interesting thing that might pop up is that, like, so firstly, I'm a bit lower on Professor X than you are. Like, I feel like spending 5 energy on a 2 power thing that's very easily countered right now, uh, it's not very good of a thing to do. But that being said, if Professor X does stay sort of semi-relevant in the meta, we will see the resurgence of like cards that haven't been played in a while, right? Like, I think Vision will be back because Vision is
Mm-hmm.
just so good into like a prof now. Nocturne is still widely being played, and that will just probably see a surge in play just because right? Like if opponent just randomly has a prof, you have your Nocturne that will just like, it's basically like better Jeff a lot of the time right now versus
She's
prof.
so
So
good.
so yeah, so I do think prof X songs will go really down, but we have to see. We have to see if there's actually like a meta defining force that could involve Professor X still.
Speaking of meta defining forces, Hela also took a nerf, and the reactions I've seen are so varied to this one. What happens is every card she brings back, she now brings back with -2 power. To me, that puts a lot more pressure on the Infinite. Like this is now a deck that it's like if you're not discarding the Infinite, suddenly you're very much doing normal deck things, right? Like you're bringing back a Magneto and a Black Cat and maybe one other card, and it's like that's super beatable. But if you are discarding the Infinite, that guy's still big enough that the -2 doesn't really impact it all that much.
Yeah.
And so I've seen people saying everything from, oh, she's dead. I can't believe they nerfed the free to play deck to what are they doing? They need to put like -4 on her. She's going to keep running wild. I personally think she's still going to be good, but her sort of position at the top of the metagame is always due to being the least interactable and most power for the least interaction combo deck. And it's like, does Bounce beat her now? Does the Wong deck beat her now? Do those decks just do enough power that they win that matchup now? Because I think if there are other decks in the metagame that are reasonably able to hit that power level that she reaches, she loses a lot of utility as like, why would you play this?
Yeah, we did see, and we over the course of Marvel Snap's history, that like power reductions do make a significant impact on like a card's playability, right? For sure. And then now with Hela, it's actually not just one power reduction; it's power reduction on everything she revives, which is the core strategy, right? You want to revive as many things as possible, so every single thing goes -2. I echo your sentiment in that, like if you still do this card at Infinite, 618 probably gets there, you know. But like anything else, it's definitely gonna be a big of an impact. But having said that though, like I do think that when it comes to like the nerf to Prof X and the nerf to Hela, I think the nerf to Hela is like a little bit like less powerful, I would say. Because like if you think about it, Hela, the whole turn 6 Hela reviving everything is scary, but it's not like Hela has no stats prior, right? Hela actually has quite a bit of stats prior. They have like Blade, they have Lady Sif, they have Jubilee into Blink. It's still like a lot of power. And then you have the Hela Bomb at the end, which is like about 30 over stats. Now it's maybe 28 stats, oh dear. But like the point is I do think that it's gonna be substantial, the difference. Like it's gonna make a difference. But I think in terms of like, let's just say both Professor X and Hela getting dropped in play rate, I think Professor X's play rate will
Yeah.
drop a lot more than the Hela one, because Hela firstly is still very simple to play, right? It's the same thing. It's just that it's a bit less power. But it's still very powerful, you know. So I do think she'll be more of a mainstay than Professor X will be in the week to come. We'll see. But this is just my read right now.
I would expect her to still be good, but worse. And that's really what
Yeah.
you want from a nerf like this, because I don't think Second Dinner wanted to kill Hela. I think Second
Yes.
Dinner wanted to be like, all right, we need a balance lever on this card that we can actually adjust, and that -2 is the balance lever, right? Now in future OTAs, they can just be like, oh, -3, -1, whatever you want, right? Like you can make that happen. And so I think that this is a very clever nerf to Hela, and I think that I do expect her to still be around. I honestly do, but I also think that it makes her more beatable in those mid games where it's like you are much more able to be like, this is a beatable amount of power unless the Infinite is one of the things they discarded. And I think that's important.
Yeah, I'll echo one of your sentiments though, which is like with this power reduction, like point stacks actually can bother trying to contest turn 6 Hela, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't have to straight up retreat just cause you think they have Hela. Now you actually do a bit of counting and like, oh, actually -2 here and there is actually relevant to my strategy. Like the main one being like you mentioned, bounce. I think bounce realistically can say that, all right, I will stay into a turn 6. I will stay into a turn 6 Hela and sometimes win here.
Yeah. And I think the more true that is, the better the game feels. Because Hela's
Yeah.
major issue is you just kind of die and there wasn't anything you could do about it. Bringing her down to the range that like the top end of mid-range decks can sometimes get to, that's what you want. You don't want those decks beating her like 70% of the time, but you want them to be able to reasonably stay into it. Gilgamesh got a buff, and he is now, as far as I can tell, once you have the setup done, the biggest 5-drop in the game.
Yep.
He's a
I
5/9
mean,
now, same ability.
yeah, I mean, like this is what I meant by like cards with increased or decreased power through an OTA will see a significant change, right? Like the one that I really want to speak about is also Red Hawk. Red Hawk got a bit of a nerf, so
Mm-hmm.
Red Hawk is like a lot. I wouldn't say a lot worse, but it's definitely an impactful amount of worse than it used to be. Whereas for Gilgamesh with the +2 power, previously we also didn't really play much Gilgamesh stuff because there was like obviously there was a lot of better things to do like back then, which is like Prof X Cannonball, right? But now when there's less oppressive lane locking strategies in play, you can just run the big guy with your blue Marvel and play your like I don't know Zoo strategies, Patriot strategies, like okay. So I talk about Ultron a lot as like a 620 because it's like if you don't play many cards, you play an Ultron, it populates everything and it's like a 620. This is like 520. Like
Yep.
in situations where you don't want to slam Ultron, you can go Blue Marvel, slam this thing at 520 tall up. Like Ultron is wide 620, right? This is 520 one shot up. So like I think this card has potential in like a green power decks, mainly the Blue Marvel decks, because that's where you get the biggest spike of power, right? And I guess because we've been memeing, or at least my chat and I have been memeing about Gilgamesh being Gilgameh for the longest time. But it's not very meh right now, right? I don't even think it's mid. I think it might be above average in terms of power level in general. Like, I don't think you really would play this in those Angela, Tina, Kitty decks. But even if you do, it's like 514,
Yeah.
maybe. Yeah, it's kind of big, right?
Yeah.
So something that could replace Cannonball because Cannonball Prof is definitely worse right now. So if you don't really have Cannonball, you don't really want to play Cannonball. You just want a big thing. This one is probably quite a good and decent big thing in your like generic mid-range decks.
I actually would do that. It was one of the things on my list to do today that I didn't get around to doing is
Same.
just take the Thena Angela Kitty deck that was the shell for the Profex stuff and be like, all right, we are now playing, I don't know, like Dazzler, Squirrel Girl, Blue Marvel, Gilgamesh, right? And
Mm.
that is sort of the way I wanted to go. I do think it's impossible to play this guy without Squirrel Girl. I do think it's impossible to play this guy without Blue Marvel. And like that's the direction I would take that deck, where it's like, all right, here's what's happening. We are an Elsa deck, we are a Squirrel Girl deck, we are a Gilgamesh deck, we are a Blue Marvel deck, and we're just gonna put out a bunch of points, and our interaction is gonna be Red Guardian, and that's just gonna be enough. Okay, look, I realize that we have a section for Stegron, and we didn't make a section for Red Hulk. I get it. The Red Hulk, I'll be honest with you, Red Hulk, when I played him, felt exactly the same. Like, yeah, he's a little bit worse, but he's the same guy. Stegron is a card that I actually like now. I think if you make
Yeah.
anything a 4/7, it's very easy for me to be like, oh, yeah, I'm into that, right? But
Yeah.
a 4/7 that moves a card to a specific location is like, that's a valuable clogging tool. He will be clogging people some of the time as a 4/7 with potential Miles Morales synergy. Like, I think this card is, it might not be great, but I think it is like somewhere between, like a 6 out of 10 to like a 8 out of 10 right now. Like a 6 or a 7 or an 8. High 8's probably a little bit high. But like, this is now a card that I'm like, oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I do want to play with a 4/7. Like
Yeah.
4/7 is just like it's like above average stats, right? Like
Yeah.
it's just good. Like and then the thing is now when it comes to like movement of the card, it's not completely random anymore. It's actually sort of curated, right? It always goes to the right. Like without a doubt, it will always go to the right. So I do think this card has potential. Just that I don't really know where you want to play this in yet. You could actually just slam it in your mid-range decks, or you could play a more dedicated like Silk Smooth style and then play this with Miles Morales as well, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, I haven't experimented with it yet, but I think there's a lot of potential for this new Stegron simply because he's a 4/7.
Next up is Cersei, and I think both of us are on the same page about this card. It's very good, but we wanted to use Cersei to sort of teach, I guess this is a teachable moment, right? I have talked to so many good players, and the resounding consensus has been this card is very good. It is a good card at preventing your Annihilus stuff from being bad. It's the best second Annihilus that deck can play. It's got good synergy with Mockingbird. It does a lot of really powerful stuff. And meanwhile, a lot of what I'm seeing from players who are, I don't know, not that, is, oh my god, I lose sometimes when I play this card. And I think the lesson I want to impart to you here, and it's the same lesson I want to talk about with Nocturne, is that sometimes a good card will still lose you the game. It will happen, and you have to accept that you are willing to lose the game when you play the card. Sometimes you will get that deathlock. Sometimes, what happened to me, you will get a 5-drop that kills your other 5-drop and loses you the potential to win the game. She will sell some of the time, but you would almost certainly not have been in those games without her. And that
Exactly.
is the key. Like, there are so many games where she's either good or bad or what have you, But focusing on the disaster outcomes is not the way to win. If you are 90% to win, 10% to get disaster, and you get that 10%, that sucks. But
Yeah.
the other rest of the time, you're going to win. You take a 90-10 any day of the week.
Yeah, so I just want to add 2 points to this because I've addressed this a lot on like many different platforms already. But like the first point is like as KM mentioned, I feel like people thinking Cersei is not good is because they don't have full control
Yeah.
over the outcomes, which is impossible, right? You never have full control over the Cersei outcomes. But what you do know for sure is that turning a 3 drop into a 4 drop, turning a 4 into a 5, turning a 5 into a 6, turning a 1 into a 2, it's statistically supposed to be an improvement, right? Like it's obviously like your 6 cost cards will have more stats than your 5s, and your 5s should have more stats than your 4s on average. So I feel like in general, playing Cersei on a location with a bunch of small stuff, you can literally say, all right, I'm staying for 8 cubes because I play Cersei on my left, turning all my 1s into 2s. It should be more stats, and then I should
Mm-hmm.
win the lane because it's more stats. If it's not more stats, it's not that you are bad, or it's not that the card is bad. It's just you just didn't get more stats, right? But it's supposed to be in general. So I feel like people, I guess, low rolling on Cersei makes them think that it's a bad card. It's not something that you should be looking at. You should be looking at like the fact that I turn my 5 cost into a 6 cost. It should be an upgrade. And of course, the general one is just that you turn a void. You turn a void into something that's a 5. Obviously, that's an upgrade, right? So even in her worst case scenarios, and you run her in the deck with the sentry, she's just gonna be an improvement. Also, I do want to say that like this card, on a in like a conquest situation or like a tournament situation, there's a lot of times like in conquest or in tournaments you can't exactly retreat, right? Like you don't actually have a way to retreat. You just need to play out the game. This card gives you those outs. Like I'm gonna go into that whole like 1 out of 1,000 scenario again, whereby let's just say you need to turn your Red Guardian into an Enchantress to kill a Tribunal deck. Then you do it, right? Cersei lets you do that. Does it work? No, it probably doesn't. But like there's that option, So Cersei gives you that option to just high roll absurd outs in situations where you were 100% lost. So I think like having that option on a 5/7 body is very relevant in many situations. And I think if you guys go relook at Cersei as a card again, you will see that like she really does let you win in impossible situations. And on average, she's supposed to upgrade what's already on your board. So if you guys are having doubts on Cersei, I guess this is like our pitch to say that try not to have so many doubts on Cersei. She's actually just a good card.
She's just good. Like, it's like saying Nocturne is bad because sometimes she gives you bar with no name. It's like,
Yeah.
she's amazing. Nocturne's an amazing card. Yes, she'll sell some of the time, but you just have to deal with that because the rest of it is so good, right? And Cersei is like that. I think Nocturne is a better card, but Cersei is like
Yeah.
a very strong card. And I think the only question for her is competition at the 5 and whether or not her decks are actually, viable into a metagame rather than like her baseline strength. I do
Yes.
think one thing I've noticed about her though is like, you play her as second Annihilus, right?
Yep.
That's actually kind of bad into Loki because it means they get a second shot at getting rid of like the void that you give them or whatever, right? A lot of those matchups already come down to I am going to, like Annihilus them and say, I hope you didn't get my Annihilus. Now they could also get your Cersei. There is something to that, I think. But
Okay,
I.
so
Hmm,
yeah, no, I just wanted to add a fun play tip, like to improve your Cersei gameplay, which is like if you're running like a Cersei Mockingbird deck, right, and Annihilus deck, I tend to stack all my non-randomly generated stuff in the same location. Because
yes.
if you Cersei those, your Mockingbird is very often 0, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a thing that I've been doing that might be slightly overlooked. Like you can actively from turn 1 or 2 start stacking your non-randomly generated stuff in the same location, and then when you morph them with Cersei, they all discount Mockingbird all at once, and then on your final turn you have like a 0 cost Mockingbird with a ton of stuff. That's kind of cool to do.
I've got another one. Unless you need like a super specific high roll to win, do not Cersei your Mockingbird. Mockingbird
Oh
at
yeah,
9 is going to be better than the average 6 cost card.
yeah, I would say
The
so.
average 6 cost card, someone did the math on this. It was like 8.85 power. Mockingbird at 9, a little bit above that, right? So I already was thinking this, and then I saw the math and it was like, okay, so one of those cards just doing average power is like, one of those cards is Destroyer, which is obviously terrible. And so
Yeah.
it's even actually less than 8.85. I think it is very safe to say do not Cersei your Mockingbird. So it's day one as we record this of the new meta. Lambie, what did you think of the day one metagame?
Right, so I have had limited testing with this day one meta game, but I similar to you, I've seen like little to no Professor X. Like I don't think this means that Professor X is unplayable. I think like just because like nerf syndrome, people see that it's a huge nerf to the prof, they just don't want to play it, and people are just sick of prof, right? So I do think me not seeing that many prof doesn't mean it's completely gone. Me, I also didn't really see much Hella, but I think it's
Yeah.
gonna be back really soon as well because it's the same thing, it's just nerf syndrome. But after a while, people realize that Hella is actually still really really strong. I feel. So I think those might come back. But for what I saw on day one, I saw at least on my server in Asia, people we all just love this like Sentry and Nihilus thing anyway. Maybe in every server as well.
Yeah.
So like I do see more Sentry and Nihilus stuff because clearly with the prof being unable to stop the void being sent over now, like people just want to play more Sentry. So that's a lot. I do still see the good stuff decks like the Tinas, the what's they called, the Angelas, but I guess the top end was a bit different, less prof, more just Red Hulk, Hope Summers, and like stuff.
Yeah.
I saw some Blink decks. I'm kind of happy that Blink decks are back. Like I saw a bit more Blink decks as well, like non-Hella Blink decks. Yeah, I don't think there's actually a defined meta. Like this is just like what we saw on day one, right?
Yeah.
But yeah. So my point is that like I do think Prof and Hella will gradually ease their way back into the meta. Just that I think more Hella than Prof, and I guess there's a way to play Prof with some Silk Smooth stuff, right? You go Stagron Prof, and then you run like Miles Morales, and stuff that lets you win your Prof lane because you have so many move related cards. So I think that's one thing to consider as well.
I saw one thing that really stuck out to me is I think I saw more Captain Marvels today than I've ever seen in my entire life. I don't know
Oh,
if
that's
that's gonna
true.
like stick around or anything, but I saw like a shocking amount of Captain Marvels. I also think that like the main things I saw were like Cersei, Annie, Sentry decks,
Yeah.
Angela, Athena decks with varying end games at the top end. And I think as those decks sort of explore themselves and figure it out, they will figure certain things out. What else I saw though is Loki, and I also played a lot
Mhm.
of Loki because when you have a metagame that's full of these like, here are my good cards in a mid-range deck, it seems like a very good time to play a card that is the mid-range hammer. And so now we're going to talk about our day one deck recommendations. My day one deck recommendation to you would be Loki. A lot of people are playing these sort of iffy mid range type stuff. If by the time you're watching this, people have already picked up Loki, then my day one deck recommendation to you would be a Pixie Mobius deck. I sort of went through the progression on day one where I was like, I'm gonna start with like an Angela Athena low cost deck, right? Kind of like Noki, Angela Athena, just Nocturne Sage, Ravona, all the good cards, right? Series 5 pile, throw my wallet at you, the deck. And then I was like, you know what? I'm running into too much stuff that's got too many stats. I'm going to go back to Loki and beat up on the mid range decks that was very successful. And then I was like, let's see what we can do to beat up on Loki. That was Pixie Mobius, right? And so that's sort of how I envision the game starting out on day one. And then, Hela still probably beats Loki. It'll find a way to get back in. Phoenix Force beats Loki. It might find a way to get back in. There's a lot of viable ways to try to combat this stuff, in my opinion.
Yeah, I actually think honestly, my day one recommendation, I wouldn't say Loki because you already said it, but yeah, Loki kind of does make sense as well. But one thing I would really recommend, like, okay, so day one recommendation, I'm assuming yeah, like your goal is to still climb the ladder,
Yeah.
correct? So I think day one recommendation, if you actually can find it in yourself to keep playing Hella, you actually will still win a lot of games. Because like I really
Ooh.
think because the general sentiment is Prof X down, Hella down, so people bring back the Loki. But then if you still bring on the Hella, I think it's still gonna do really well. And with Prof X being not what he used to be, then the Hella will probably be a bit more staunch, right? I would also recommend, yeah, so Hella for sure might be a bit on the boring side since you've been doing it for a while, but it does win games. I also would want to recommend the whole like the Annihilus Sentry deck. It's just a consistent and strong deck, and with one less like detriment to your game plan, which is the prof on the Sentry on the Void location. Like I do think that deck is a bit more. It's quite staunch right now. So these two are my recommendations, and of course with the Loki as well. I think that's it. I don't feel like there's maybe any other deck that you would really reliably use to climb right now in this like undefined meta. Maybe you could play some, I don't know, Tribunal. I know like it's gonna sound crazy.
No,
It's
I
gonna
get
sound
it. I
crazy, but
get where you're coming from.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Because no one has counters to this right now. Like no
Yeah.
one is randomly putting Enchantress in their deck. No one is randomly putting Rogue in their deck. Like why would they do that, right? Because there's nothing to counter per se. You just bring a random Tribunal and just farm everyone who's playing normal decks.
Yeah. No, that could totally work. One dark horse I wanted to mention. The last time we were in an Annihilus meta was when the Deathbird deck got made. Like
Mm-hmm.
the sort of anti-Annihilus deck. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know how much of a space it has now that those decks are also playing Cersei, the Annihilus decks. But I do think that Lady Deathstrike might make a sort of dark horse appearance at some point. I certainly felt as though I was playing stuff that would like totally eat it to Lady Deathstrike. I am curious to see what she can do in a metagame like this. Final topic, play to win. And I don't mean this as generic advice for everyone, but if you are going to get upset at losing, then you need to play to win. And that means having a little bit of discipline. And that means, in turn, and this is definitely something I'm working on, don't pick a deck that you think is fun and then get upset when you lose with it. Pick a deck you think is good and then try to play well. Don't cope stay just to see what people have, because then if you're going to get mad, you're going to get mad. I guess the point I'm making here is if you actually want to care about your rank, commit to it. Care about it. Don't only care when it's going well. Take the time to make good habits and stick to those habits and understand that you got to be honest with yourself. Are you going to be upset if you lose? Okay, then you should try harder to win. And I think that means that applies to deck selection, that applies to like snapping and retreating, that applies to accepting when you lose a 70-30 and just being like, well, that happens. It has to happen like that. If you're going to be upset when you lose, try your hardest to win. Because one recipe for getting very upset is being like, I'm really mad. I'm going to play something fun. And then the fun deck isn't very good. And then you lose more. And I want people to avoid that.
Yeah, so I think there's 2 points here that I want to touch on really quickly, which is I feel like if okay, it really depends on what your goal is, right? So the first goal is if you're just like trying to experiment with a fun deck, sure. But then of course in that situation you need to expect it to not go as well because like
Yes.
random fun decks, combo decks or whatever decks are probably not gonna win as hard as like the meta decks, right? That's why the meta is the meta. So if that's your choice, then fine. Then you have to manage your expectations as well. But of course, if your goal is to win and climb, there is a reason why certain things are meta. And I would say playing those would give you the best chance. I would say playing a meta deck and playing it well is better than playing a random not consistent deck and like hoping it works out, you know. So I think playing a meta deck and understanding the matchups and playing it well wins you more. And like what KM said, right, like you really have to manage your expectations. Like if you're playing something that like is like so off the wall that it like only works like 2 out of 10 times, you do expect to lose a lot of games. But then if you really are intent on climbing, play something a bit more consistent, a bit more proven, and then do it well, play it well, and then you likely will see better returns, you know. But at the same time, I also think one thing to note about playing to win, which we talked about in like the tilt topic on KM's previous episode, which is there's a lot of times whereby you need to justify and understand, not justify, sorry, you need to identify the difference between making bad plays and just like like RNG just not being in your favor. You can't control RNG, but you can control yourself, you know. So like if you made a mistake, like, and you know it's clearly like your fault, like why did I stay for 8 cubes here? Clearly there was no way I was gonna win, that kind of thing. Compared to, okay, I stayed for 8 cubes here and there was only one way he could win. Like the second scenario does piss people off a bit more because like you thought you had everything under control and then like you just lost. But you also know that the second scenario is not likely to happen as often because you actually made the correct decision and then just sometimes RNG just doesn't go your way. So I think understanding when things don't go your way and it's not exactly your fault helps you maintain the calm and ability to play to win. Whereas like if you go off the rails about like, oh, I did everything correct but I still lost to RNG, this game sucks. Like if you think about it that way, then yeah, it's gonna be a very horrible experience for you in the long run. But in general, I would say that like for the most part, if you are making good decisions and things don't work out, it's not your fault. It's just you were doing the right thing and then sometimes it doesn't happen. It's probably gonna happen the right way to you in the future, just that now it doesn't. So don't get too like worked up about it. It's not really exactly something that you can control, you know.
Yeah, I think the main thing I want to convey is if I think there's this thing that people do to sort of protect themselves is they say like, oh, I'm not going to really try or whatever.
Yeah.
And I want you to, if this feels like it applies to you, I want you to understand that you need to be honest with yourself. If you
Mhm.
care, try. If you care, try. If you would be just as happy at Infinite or at rank 87, I think that's fine. But if you would
Yes.
not be just as happy in those situations, try. And like that's what I'm trying to get across here is I know there are people who think one thing and then when that thing actually happens and they end up on the downside of that RNG, it is not true. If you would be very upset by losing this game and you think you're going to lose this game, you should treat the game. Like it's I don't know. It's there are these things that people tell themselves to protect the ego, and I think what I'm trying to get across here is I definitely struggle with this stuff. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I don't. But if you need to be honest with yourself, if it would bother you to lose, try. Just try to win.
Yeah, I want to add one thing to that, which is something that I've been actively using in this game and in like my past competitive experiences and also in my future competitive experiences. I'll be using this a lot, which I think is a very cool pro tip, which is a lot of the times, like, because KM's point is very relevant in that, like, there's a lot of scenarios whereby you ended the game and so, and you just like, oh, there's nothing I could do. I was gonna lose for sure. There's absolutely nothing I could do. But like, the funny thing about that statement is that if there was really absolutely nothing you could do, fine. But a lot of the time, you are just justifying like a bad decision, right? But so there is no real way for someone externally to be like, oh, actually, I think you were just coping, you know. But if you have to find it in yourself to tell yourself and ask yourself, like, was it really the correct decision? You have to admit to yourself that sometimes you were wrong. And okay, obviously sometimes you can go through all the processes and be like, okay, I think I was still correct, then fine. But if you go through all that processes and you find like an inch of doubt, like, hey, maybe I should have just left. Maybe you should just accept that you should have just left and move on. You know, like I think the acceptance of sometimes you could have done something better is something that a lot of people don't accept, you know, like as much as it's more relevant among good players, because good players will be like they have a certain level of expertise in a game or something, right? So like they don't think they could have done something wrong. But sometimes even good players do make mistakes. And I think good players become great players once they can accept that like their initial thought process might be not perfect, and then they just like correct it and go from there. If you're just constantly thinking like, oh, I'm always making the best plays and it's impossible for me to make a mistake, then of course then that's a problem, right? Because you're never gonna get to the next level.
I fat fingered and played a Red Guardian instead of a Mobius on turn 3 after playing Pixie. My opponent snapped me and I stayed. Like, it's just like I'm pretty good at this game and I still do this stuff. Like a mistake will compound. You'll be like, "Oh, it's not that bad." And in a real world, it's like, "Actually, yes, it is that bad. Sorry, you lost when you did that." Like I lost when I made that play and I gave them an extra cube because I'm stupid and stubborn and arrogant. And it's just like you gotta not do that. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for making it through that part of the video. I was surprised by how much we had to say about that. I got to tell you. Thank you, of course, to Lambie. We are back up and running on his channel. Expect these to keep going into the future. I have been KMBest. He has been Lambie Series, and he's about to take us out.
Thank you so much for being here, guys. This one will be on my channel. If you like what you see, do comment, subscribe, and say something nice in general. And we'll see you guys in the next one on KM's channel. Bye-bye.